Hey guys, this is Mike Mahaffey, the old bastard BJJ guy, here for BJJ Mental Models. Back in my day, we had to walk uphill in the snow both ways to get to the academy just to learn some crappy technique from a random purple belt. You kids have it so easy because now you can just subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium and get tons of great audio courses to learn new techniques, enhance your mindset, and entertain yourself. You can even get personalized rolling reviews from some of your favorite BJJ Mental Models coaches, including me. It's like having your own seminar, you spoiled little whippersnappers. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to BJJ Mental Models Premium right now, get off my lawn, and go train.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 311. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today, I'm back again with a repeat offender. I've got Chris the Villain Paynes, very popular guest of the show. It's been a while, Chris. Everyone always loves our chat, so I'm glad to have you back here. How's it been, my friend?
Repeat offender? Where did that come from? I understand that I get called the villain, but repeat offender? I thought I'd be cherished guest or something. Well, it was going well until that opening.
I was telling my daughter that one of my favorite things to do, I've got a few people in my life that I just love to constantly rag on, and you're one of them, sir. It wouldn't be a Chris Payne's appearance on BJJ Mental Models if I didn't just make you stay up late and crap on you for no reason. So here we are.
Well, you messaged me before we came on. You said, I tagged you on the Discord. I was like, I don't think I get tags. I don't think I get notifications. And so I've probably missed maybe 99.9% of all the ragging you've done on me. So I think I need to figure out where this tag system works and go look at my notifications. I might suddenly end up with 1 year's worth of abuse that I wasn't aware of.
Well, hey, for those who missed the earlier episodes, why don't you give yourself a quick intro, buddy?
So I am Preet Michelson's, I think, first British black belt. Might be one of the first international ones, but so I'm not his student. I am self-taught, but I met Preet when I was a brown belt. I got my belts through BJJ Globetrotters. We met each other. I think we became friends. I think that's how he looks at me sometimes, if that's possible. And he assisted with my journey up to black belt 2 years later. And then I had a video kind of go semi-viral at one point back in 2019. And I've just been living off that one song ever since, and that's pretty much my life now. I just travel the world just doing Final Countdown, no matter where I go.
Amazing, buddy. Well, let's plug that video. I will put a link in the show notes, but I presume you're talking about how to defend everything?
That's the one, yes. It's the amount of things I've released since, even things that completely contradict what I said in that video. It's still the only song I get asked to sing, so I'm just accepting it now. It is my Don't Stop Believing.
At least people ask you to sing one song, though. I mean, the majority of instructors out there, their struggle is no one even knows who I am, right? Having one song, being a one-hit wonder, is still better than being a no-hit wonder. There's a lot of very wealthy one-hit wonders out there.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Rick Astley's not complaining.
His one-hit wonder became more of a cultural movement, I guess, so that's something different. But anyway, yeah, I always love having you on here because you have a really great conceptual way of looking at things. You're also informed by all of these practices that we talk about all the time, like Preet stuff, the ecological approach, all of this. But what I wanted to talk to you about today is something that a mutual friend of ours, Rob Bernacki, has brought up repeatedly to me over the last while, and he's specifically credited to you. And so I thought this might make a great topic for discussion for both students and coaches out there. So I'm going to let you riff on this. What Rob has talked about is the way that you think of complexity versus intensity, and how as a coach or a student, these are two dials that you have control over to dictate kind of the quality of the training environment, but is probably best suited coming from you. What's this all about? What is this complexity and intensity framework that you've been using that's got people like Rob so inspired?
So I think it kind of came from initial kind of understandings of ecological, but it was purely by accident. I didn't really know what ecological was. I think it was just more a case of I was looking at students and thinking, what makes the most sense from a coach? You just want to see people get better. And so one of the things I'm kind of an avid video gamer. And if I'm not, I don't really watch much about jiu-jitsu after I kind of leave work per day. I mostly watch gaming podcasts and stuff like that. But one of the things I was kind of looking at and very interested in is this idea of how like levels created in video games, to my basic knowledge of the game is trying to teach you how to play itself. The game is not a competition with you. And the game is trying to introduce mechanics over time. And once it introduces a mechanic, like a certain move or something like that, or like a new weapon or anything, is it will then give you enemies that can be dealt with by that weapon. But it will change the intensity and, maybe add some complexity from previous weapons into it. And it's trying to teach you the game. And then when it wants to introduce a new mechanic, it will almost like reset the intensity. Like the idea that a puzzle maker isn't in competition with a puzzle solver. And that's kind of I wasn't really a big fan of ecological, especially this kind of like open season kind of competition way of doing it, especially in a gym environment. I will kind of talk about that at some point. So the way I kind of approached it instead was this: when we're drilling is I'll kind of introduce the concept of what I want to happen. And say like one of the recent ones, we've had a beginner course I was trying to introduce as how to improve balance. And that kind of fascinated me. It's kind of a stop word of, I know I need to improve my balance. Yes, coach, I need to improve my balance. But how? It's kind of like, sure, we both know what that word means, but it doesn't really, we want to stand on one foot. And so the way I kind of started to explain it was the idea of a tripod of, if you imagine if I was to make a tripod solid and shine a light down from the ceiling, I'd get a shape on the ground, like a triangular shape. And my balance is my weight being inside my shadow. And if the camera was to fall outside of the shadow, then the camera falls to the ground. And so the way I've kind of been teaching people to kind of improve their balance is not let their weight travel near the edges of their shadow, the one they keep on the floor. And so that would be the concept of, right, I want to almost be static and keep your weight as far from the edges of your shadow as you can. Like make a tripod, a table, etc. And then the person on the floor, I want to use your legs to try and push them out of their shadow, because then that makes them fall over. That's when a sweep happens. And so that's the concept has been delivered. And then I introduced this idea of video game mechanics of, right, so the person on the floor is now the puzzle maker. The person on top is the puzzle solver. They're the one learning from this exercise. So the person on the floor is now, okay, well, I need to push this person out of the shadow. I'm going to push them this way with this leg, or I might knock their shadow this way. And so they have a mechanic and they'll start to increase the intensity and try and test that person's weight and their balance. If their balance fails and they fall, then they can repeat the process again. Then go, right, I fell over that edge. I know why, because my weight went close to it. We'll repeat it. And we repeat that exact same puzzle again. And then once the kind of intensity has kind of been maxed out, maybe change the mechanic. Maybe I'm going to use my arm to push you this time, at which point the intensity can be kind of reset. And they can introduce some of the other mechanics back into it. And that's then how I pretty much run my drill. So it's almost like loath to say, almost like similar to ecological in this idea of game, but not necessarily the game of being competitive against each other, but as in, I'm trying to make you better through video game. So that's the idea of complex.
What type of games are we talking about? I got to ask. What kind of games are we playing?
Pretty much anything. You could go all the way back to Mario. And think, those first kind of like, the first thing you see when you start up Mario on the NES is that Mario jumps, to my knowledge. Like, he runs in, does a little jump, and right, that's my initial mechanic. And so I come in, I meet two Goombas, and I jump on both of them. We then go a bit further, and now we meet a turtle. Like, we have maybe 3 or 4 Goombas, now we meet a single turtle. We jump on the single turtle, and it doesn't kill it, now it moves side to side. It's like, okay, that's a new mechanic. And then more turtles could arrive, now we've got flying turtles, so they could all be treated by the same mechanic, it's just the intensity is changing. And then once you've kind of got used to the intensity and can deal with all those, then they introduce a new mechanic, or you've got the fire sprite kind of comes out. That's something else entirely. And now the intensity changes again. So even from there on, it's always been this way of like how games will teach you to play themselves and not try to compete against you.
This is actually an area that I worked in for many years, game design. And if you want to get an interesting perspective on how to teach people, watch some tutorial videos about how game design works. And you specifically brought up old school Super Mario Brothers, which is a fascinating example because this is back in a time before textual tutorials were really a thing. If you play a modern video game, much of the time now, there's going to be this big, massive tutorial, and there's basically an interactive manual that's built into the game. It'll just pop up instructions on the screen and make you do things. The original Mario didn't have that luxury, mostly due to technical limitations at the time. Things like adding unnecessary text into a game. These were super expensive things that developers would often try to avoid. So they had to make a game that was intuitive enough that people could figure it out. without having been told. And also they could figure it out without the frustration being so great that either they struggle to learn or they get frustrated and they walk away. And there's a lot of things that culturally we're used to now that really, I don't think we consider how impressive it is that we've been able to learn this stuff without being taught. So in the case of Mario, again, the example that a lot of people give is you scroll to the right. I mean, we take that for granted that in a game like that, it is just intuitive that you scroll to the right. And part of that is the way that the game is designed. And then they gently introduce mechanics like jumping and all of that, and they kind of build on that. And that kind of approach, like you talked about, it might feel at times like the game is fighting you, but in reality, the game is cooperating with you. It is being a coach. And like you brought up, that is, I think, such a great mindset in jiu-jitsu, this idea that this role we have going on is not as competitive as maybe we think it is, and maybe it should be considered collaborative. Josh McKinney has been on the podcast. He has an approach he calls designated winner, which is kind of similar to what you're talking about, where when one person is executing, you as the other person, your job is not to shut them down or defeat them. Your job is to collaborate with them on their skill development. And that is such a game change from the way that most people in jiu-jitsu think about how a class should be structured.
I mean, it was actually full credit to Rob, but Rob kind of was one of the main catalysts for this, Mr. Bianacchi himself. I had him on my podcast a year ago, and one of the things he said was, it's kind of sad that the main form of competition for most people in jiu-jitsu is their own teammates. And that really, really got under my skin and didn't leave me after that. And it was this idea that, yeah, absolutely, like, we kind of support our team when we go to competitions and, we'll fight for our team. But then the hierarchy and the trying to one-up each other, and you have gym rivals and all those things. It's, to me, that, I might be alone here, but I think that's kind of the root of pretty much all toxicity that we kind of feel most of the time for the majority of the jiu-jitsu population. And so kind of going down a pure ecological way of like allowing constraint-led sparring almost to try and figure out certain aspects. There's always going to be a winner and person who isn't going to learn as much, because it's naturally how we're kind of brought into jiu-jitsu, this dog-eat-dog kind of mentality. And so one of the things that I then kind of, going down that route of video gaming was I then kind of reapproached how I wanted to kind of run my gym, to not have a group of individuals and a team name, but more a case of more like a football team where, using the British standard of football here, not American. In midweek practice, the defender doesn't hack out the striker's legs just to prove that he's better. It's a case of, if I get better, or if I help you get better, you're going to help me get better kind of way. If I become a better defender for you, you're going to become a better striker. And by you becoming a better striker, it's going to make me a better defender. But if I just one-up you every single session, you never get going, then you don't learn anything. It's the same as like if I was a striker and I sent, 100 goals past my goalkeeper, it doesn't kind of prove anything. Like, great, cool, I'm going to go home and feel great about myself. But if I can help you get better in goal, that's going to help me get better in the long run. And so, we had these kind of new beginners coming recently. The first thing they said to them was like, welcome to the team. Team progress comes before self-progress. As in, you helping the team, joining the team as if this was a football club, will make us all better. And then that kind of mentality of, right, when we're sparring, we can do almost like the most crazy things, like start from standing. And I kind of get these questions on my podcast sometimes of like, well, how do you safely teach people from standing? Well, how do you, what do you mean you don't teach people or let people do submissions? It's like, why do they need to know them? As in, why, because they'll say, well, how do they win? How do they win in the gym? Why do they need to win? And that's kind of like almost like a tree falling in the woods moment of, yeah, but why would it be a problem? Like, we're on the same team. Our goal is to work together to then go face another football team at the weekend. But in midweek practice, we're on the same team. And then when you have that approach of, I'm going to try and make puzzles for you to solve to make you better, that makes more sense to me, because that's how a football team would go.
Yeah. It makes me think of how when you get injured by your training partners, it's one of the most rage-inducing things in jiu-jitsu if they were rolling with the wrong level of intensity. I find this tremendously frustrating. I mean, if you go off and you compete, understandably, there's a risk of injury because the goal of a competition is to win within the rule set, however you do it. And that means there's going to be a high level of intensity. But when you're in the training room, part of the culture is this unspoken degree of trust between you and your training partners, that you're all there to be friends and get better together. And that's why when someone in there is so clearly trying to win rather than to learn or to help their training partners, it makes people so angry because it's such a violation of trust. I mean, if you want to see a brown or a black belt get really pissed off, try to roll with them at 100% intensity and you will see them get real mad. And part of the reason why is because when you do that, you are betraying the trust that's required to be successful in that environment. If I am trying to play a game with you and learn skill and your job and you're trying to get a submission no matter what, you're happy to rip it 100%, even if you don't have control, because your priority is to get the tap in the gym. Not only are you handicapping your own skill developments, but you are actively attacking the culture of your gym. And so that is why I think when you see this happen in the gym where someone is going too hard, it's so frowned upon in jiu-jitsu, because it's not just that they're screwing up the training, it's they're adding risk to an environment that is supposed to be as safe as we can make it, and they're eroding the trust of the people in the team.
Exactly. And I think, that's kind of like the level which I'd always kind of appreciated. But then going kind of deeper into that is like, how many of us will have this kind of idea of a gym rival, or we will be thinking about our next belt or any of those things. And I think that especially how some gyms will have that kind of belt structure of like you line up in belt order, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I don't see many football teams, to my knowledge, that make them line up in hierarchy of when they joined. Like, oh, you go down there because you've only been here for 3 years, I've been here for 6 kind of thing. Or I've scored more goals. Like, why the hell are we doing this? We're on the same team. So it's almost made belts seem like a polluting factor in this. Because again, like, we always have that kind of instinctual response that, maybe we're a blue belt and you think, maybe I'll you start to get close to tapping a purple belt. I think maybe I'll catch that purple belt today. So now you're going a bit harder, again, with your own team. Or maybe you're a purple belt and some blue belt is starting to get a bit uppity and get close to you. You think, no, I'm not getting beaten by a blue belt today. And you kind of kick them back down again. And it's those moments, which I think, we're not necessarily about going 100% balls to the wall trying to kill each other, but those little moments there where it starts to kind of creep in on itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think that the belt system, it has some benefits, but I think it also has massive detriments to culture. You brought up lining up by rank. I've talked on the podcast before. I don't understand what the point of making your students line up by rank is, other than to embarrass the people who are so new that they don't know they're supposed to do that. And then you force them to do the walk of shame when they go to the wrong side of the room. I don't know what the purpose of that ritual is other than to make the junior people feel bad. And I don't understand what benefit it has in a class structure, but it's one of those things that we carry forth as a tradition just because that's how our coaches did it. And again, I think that obsession over rank really doesn't lend to a positive culture within your gym.
No, and I think that's one of the issues as well, is that, I might have mentioned this last time I was here, maybe, time is weird, is that, kind of stealing from Ryan Hall a little bit here. It's a strength-based game. It's a jiu-jitsu, along with most sport, is about power. When we go to compete, there are 3 variables we take into consideration of age, gender, and weight, because they're all variables of power. Like if I get a 80 kilo 25-year-old and an 80 kilo 60-year-old, 25-year-old is probably more powerful. If I get an 80 kilo male and an 80 kilo female, male is probably powerful just due to testosterone. And if I get a 120 kilo male and an 80 kilo male, 120 is probably more powerful. And so, we try and dial it in as much as we can with those 3 kind of power variables to something as close as damn it to ourselves. And so now we're measuring skill. And that's what we do in competition. But then you go back into the gym where it's now an open weight, open mat. And all of a sudden, when you have that kind of spark of belts as well, you could be a 70 kilo purple belt. And all of a sudden, the 100 kilo blue belt's looking at you thinking, I'm going to get a purple belt today. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? And the amount of, things I see on Reddit or on Facebook of like, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm a 70 kilo purple belt and I'm getting beaten up by these giant blue belts. How do I stop them? It's like, well, you can't beat physics. I'm sorry. I'm sorry this is fed to you, and you're in an environment where you're being targeted, and that's an environmental issue.
Yeah, you bring this up. I have had high-level grapplers who are smaller, often women, tell me that they aren't comfortable rolling at seminars now because they don't know the safety profile of the people in the room. And because of this obsession with rank and beating people, they feel it isn't safe for them. And I can understand that. If you're a woman and you weigh 110, 120 pounds, you're doing a seminar, everyone wants to roll after. What if there's some giant 250-pound white belt who's like, I'm going to tap a black belt world champion today, and they just jump you and assault you?
Yeah, exactly.
Even if said black belt world champion could beat that person, it doesn't prove anything. It just adds risk to their own health, which is not worth it. And if your gym environment is getting to the point where people are having to legitimately ask themselves, is it worth it for me to train here due to safety? That is a big problem. So again, back to Rob. I mean, one of the things that Rob always does at a seminar is, he'll roll with people after, but he will first give a lecture about what seminar rolling is supposed to look like. You're not trying to kill the other person. This is basically just a play session. And he will pick someone first and foremost who he knows he can trust to roll with to show everyone else what a roll at a seminar is supposed to look like, right? If you show up at a seminar and this procession of giant roided up blue belts try to kick your ass over and over again, that's really bad. and I know that some people will do this. I've seen seminar people do this where they'll show up and they'll just let everyone Shark Tank them to prove a point about how amazing they are at jiu-jitsu. But that is awful culture, right? You are just turning your gym into a culture of who's able to beat up who. It's not focused on skill development, and it puts a tremendous amount of risk on the people at the gym because the risk of injury piles up very, very high, especially if the people being targeted tend to be smaller or older or they have health issues.
Exactly. And it's, something I'm very aware of because the amount of Globetrotters camps I go to. Like I did the US one in Maine, the Parnu one in Estonia, and the Heidelberg one in Germany over the summer. And so, that's only 3 camps out of, possible, whatever it is, 12 he does. And there's still, over probably about 800 people across the 3 camps. And when you've got 800 people looking at you of like, oh, there's a black belt, I want to go roll with them, and you're doing about 4 hours of sparring a day, you are going to come across people who are like big purple belts, brown belts, blue belts, who just go, yeah, I'm going to grab them by the neck and start squeezing. And, I've sat in the instructor's hostel sometimes, and all the instructors are in there. Like it's almost like it's like a World War I field hospital, as in they're just like lying there, just like rocking from side to side, like their body just is dying. And we're all human still. You can leave us alone. We only want to play. But most of these people that come to camps, see it as exactly like they get to test themselves on a black belt, and they want to prove themselves a little bit, and they always roll a bit harder. They want to play, and so then you're just trying to stay alive. And it's a feeling I'm very aware of. And so I think again that kind of fed into that idea of culture of like screw belts, screw all of that thing. This has to be the safest place in the world to me. And it was something I did mention before we went live. Is I actually risk assessed jiu-jitsu, weirdly.
Well, let's talk about that. I want to hear about this. So when you say you risk assess jiu-jitsu, we're talking here about the dials of control that you have when it comes to setting your culture, like complexity and intensity. And you did mention that you do a risk assessment here on the overall risk profile of jiu-jitsu. Tell me a bit more about this and what you found.
So where it came from is that I was a health and safety lead when I was a firefighter for 12 years. And, such a dangerous activity to undertake. We had people who would jump off the truck, and one of the first jobs would be they would grab a clipboard and they would risk assess the incident. And, it was my job to kind of train people up and like just doing those kind of on the fly risk assessments, etc., and trying to propagate that information around. And so looking at the being a gym owner in a way and black belt, it's easy to kind of do a risk assessment of jiu-jitsu buildings, as in like slips, trips and falls, make sure the mats are clean, making sure that people don't wear shoes on the mats or wear bare feet off the mats, etc. But actually the sport itself kind of like fascinated me a little bit. How would I risk assess jiu-jitsu? And so if you're the regular kind of 5x5 matrix, along the bottom we'd have like hazard. And hazard is what is the outcome that could happen? What would a competent person expect an outcome to be to this? And so if you say level 1 would be like bruising, level 2 would be like first aid, level 3 might be time away from jiu-jitsu, level 4 might be hospitalization, surgery, level 5, death and paralysis. And then if you go up for risk, that's what's the chance of it happening? So level 1, yeah, not really going to happen. Level 5, almost certain. And so I then kind of approach jiu-jitsu of, right, look at techniques and scenarios and put them on the hazard scale. And then risk is a person's physical and emotional control of that situation. And pretty much anything to do with the neck, I'm going to put at 5. Because that's pretty much the only way you're going to get death and paralysis in jiu-jitsu. And that's why head outside single legs were banned. especially at white belt, because, if someone gets in wrestling, get head outside single leg, no one's going to get hold of your neck because you're not allowed to, and no one's going to jump backwards into guard because that's a loss anyway. But in jiu-jitsu, we're now showing this kind of wrestling technique that's from a different rule set. And now we're in an environment where people are going to grab the neck and jump backwards. And we went through a period of time where people were getting their necks broken. And so anything involving the neck, like, I can't, that has to be maximum control if we're going to touch it at all. And so that's then how I kind of approached how I would actually teach jiu-jitsu, because now as a competent person, ignorance isn't an excuse for negligence. And if I was to teach head outside single legs, I'm supposed to be the competent person on the mats. And it's my job as a competent person, not even from a legal kind of standpoint, but from a moral standpoint, to make sure the safety of that room is paramount. And if I'm not aware of that kind of stuff about how dangerous going for the neck is and it can cause, death and paralysis, then I am ignorant and I am being negligent, should I be in the position that I'm in.
Well, let me pick your brain on something here. A lot of people might say that this kind of mentality waters down the sport or kills its effectiveness. And I have my thoughts on this, but first I'd love to hear your perspective. For the people out there who care about the purity of the fight sport and making sure that this is a truly effective self-defense art, and they believe that the best way to become the best martial artist is to be forged in the crucible of battle, what do you tell those people about why you prefer to take this more risk calculating approach instead of just throwing everyone into a meat grinder?
Bollocks and grow up. Essentially, that's my approach to that one. No, sorry. Like, if I can be thrown into a fire and still have to risk assess it, there's no way in this middle class sport that people can get away with that one. Of no, it's crucible of fire and et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't wash. And I understand, like, it has this kind of historical precedent, and we had this romantic idea of kind of fighting. But we're all, especially jiu-jitsu, because of its middle class kind of nature of, you've got to be able to afford monthly subs, afford gis, and all those kind of competitions and seminars, et cetera, it attracts a certain level of people. And if they want to cosplay as warriors, then fine, go LARP in the park. But if we're all humans and we've all got jobs to go to and to afford going to jiu-jitsu. And so I can't morally, this isn't a life or death thing. It doesn't have to be. There's no reason for it to be. It's a sport. And again, like this idea that it's kind of maybe watered down effectiveness is that I look at it as I'll still teach chokes, etc. when the time is right. But I'll say to people, right, there's, when it comes to the neck, you have the utmost respect of controlling it. Like, here's how it works. Here, we'll kind of show it in drilling, very controlled, how a choke is supposed to work with, very small amounts of pressure to affect intracranial pressure. But when it comes to sparring, I want maximum control. As in, if you have to squeeze more than that level of pressure, you don't have the control, which means you never got that sub, which means you have to carry on. If you don't get a choke for the next 2 years, not my problem. You're going to have to fix your control. But in 2 years' time, when you have that control that you can actually completely isolate someone and then still go for the neck and use minimum amount of pressure, then you will always be able to squeeze harder. Same with joint submissions. I consider those like a level 4, is that we're trying to cause catastrophe to ligaments. We don't break bones in jiu-jitsu, which kind of makes me laugh, because like it doesn't sound the same as when you're screaming like break their leg, and in fact you're just going like actually sprain their ankles. It doesn't sound as cool like, in an MMA context. Like, I can't imagine anyone in the UFC going like sprain their elbows. Okay, I feel hyped up now. But we're tearing ligament. Let's identify what we're actually doing first. I'm going to go sprain their joint. Not to say that isn't bad. It can cause full ruptures. But at least identify what you're doing. And a submission is a way of, I'm going to cause this injury either by rotation or hyperextension. But again, is that I should be able to control that position before the submission for at least 5 seconds. If I can do the 5-second countdown, slow 5 seconds to that other person, I know that A, they can't move, and B, I'm always going to be able to finish that submission if I ever had to use it. So I can still spar, almost full speed, but I get to the control point before I put the submission on. And, that kind of brings in a lot of physical control, but also the 5-second countdown brings in a lot of emotional control as well. So then I've, taken the level 4 situation, really increased the control levels and brought the risk down to level 1. I mean, you can't put it into like the context of a car, is that, if I've got cars driving at 30 miles an hour on a dark road, and I've got lots of people walking that road with no street lighting, no sidewalk, and no, they're all wearing black clothes. Get hit by a car at 30 miles an hour, that's level 4, level 5. Like, that's going to be either a long hospitalization or death and paralysis. Chance of it happening, well, if all those kind of variables are there, where you've got people dressed in black, walking in the middle of the road at night with no sidewalks or lighting, chance of getting hit by a car is 5. So I either manage risk, where I introduce lighting, sidewalks, etc. Now the chance of getting hit by a car is a lot lower because people are walking on the sidewalk. Or if I can't build a sidewalk and lighting, I lower hazard. So I put the speed limit on that road down to 10 miles an hour. Now those people are getting hit by cars, it's a lot safer. So I then look at that in the same way as jiu-jitsu. I can't lower the hazard of a submission because the submission is supposed to cause injury. So if I can't lower that, I have to increase control. And so if someone hasn't got that kind of physical and emotional control, then they shouldn't be given submissions. Because again, that's negligent on my part.
That's an interesting take. You know what it makes me think of is you see people online, especially on Reddit, post and say things like, the purpose of a submission is to break bones and you should always be ready to break and tear. And if you don't tap and you get injured, that's your fault, not mine. This is a sport for fighters. We can't water it down. And every time I see someone post like that, I'm thinking to myself, like, buddy, you are very clearly an internet white belt who in real life is like a 35-year-old accountant. Right? You are not a UFC world champion. Let's stop spouting this cosplay bullshit because this is a skill development sport. It's like you said, if you joined a football team, you would not expect everyone else on your team to look at you and be like, I'm going to put that guy in his place. I'm going to give him so much CTE. You don't think of things this way. But in jiu-jitsu, we give ourselves permission to be negligent with our training partners and even negligent when we're doing more intense stuff. And so I think that is a really interesting perspective. I am really big on doing risk assessment and always making sure you know the risk profile of what you're doing and whether it's a good investment to be doing that. And I think this kind of comes back to the dials that you were talking about. So regulating complexity, regulating intensity. I would love to get your perspective on what that means to you. When we say you can regulate complexity versus regulating intensity, what does that actually mean? And how do you translate that to a practice environment?
It's kind of one of the reasons why I never went down pure ecological or pure drilling or any of those kind of like ways of looking at it. Is I'm essentially trying to impart my understanding of my conceptual understanding of jiu-jitsu onto students, almost like the Matrix kind of thing. Like I'm trying to download how I see jiu-jitsu into their heads because I'm supposed to be the competent person here, and so I'll use whatever tools in the toolbox to get there. And so if that means controlled drilling when it comes to exploring how a submission works and working backwards of like, right, we're trying to cause this injury. This is the control that allows us to do it at that hyperextension, a rotation. We're trying to cause damage to these ligaments or affect the neck this way to allow for the choke. We then look at the control and, that's a lot more static way of doing it. I couldn't really force eco on that. But when it comes to more open branch stuff of, right, I need you to get up. This other person, I need you to hold them down. Then it's a lot more free, a lot more open. At which point I then have this idea of, complexity and intensity is the same reason why I said that I can't allow just open season competition because unless the culture has been amended so well that people see it as, oh no, I'm trying to help this other person. At which point, if you're trying to help the other person, you're naturally going to try and make more puzzle for them anyway because you're not in competition with them. So it's kind of like, one led into the other, as in this whole idea of a football team mentality of it's midweek practice, we're playing against each other to make the rest of the team better. So I'm going to try and do stuff that, so if I knew my goalkeeper sucked, like if I'm kicking the ball, to the bottom left, I'm going to try and help him by sending it, in that corner, slower, for example, so he gets used to diving that way. I'm not going to blast it past him because I know it gets past him, which, we did take that into complexity versus intensity drilling. It's the same idea as in, if I catch you, that all of a sudden, if I kick the ball to the left, you can't save it. Cool, I'm going to lower that intensity down. So you get to do it slower. And now I'll build it back up again because I have the skill disparity here. And then when we swap it, and now, the other person's doing the drill, same idea. Like it's that kind of idea of side effect training, as in by learning how to break the concept, I'm learning how to then fight against it. Like if I want to become a better partner, I also need to understand the concept from the other angle. And I was actually teaching a private today, and the same thing came up, is that I was teaching this idea of balance. And without even explaining it to the other person on the floor, he was saying, yeah, I was seeing how she was moving, and I was trying to push over a shadow this way. And then she kind of, adjust back. So I tried to then upend her and try to push over a shadow this way. And I was using my arm to do it. I was like, exactly. Without me even teaching you how to do it, you're teaching yourself how to sweep because you want to make more complex puzzles with the increased intensity to try and help your partner out. And then when she fell over, he dialed the intensity down and redid it so she could fix it. Allow her to solve her own problems that way. That fascinates me.
Now, here's a thought for you, though. If you talk to a lot of coaches who are big supporters of ecological dynamics in jiu-jitsu, they would often hear what you're saying and probably respond by saying, well, if everyone is going too hard in the training room, then you're just not doing eco the correct way. And the argument may be that through clever constraints and game design, you can change the tone of the role so that it's more gentle. Do you believe that? Do you think that's possible? Or do you think that you need to have a more active role in regulating the intensity as a coach?
The way I see it is kind of affected how I then want to give out belts, is that my job as a coach is now less try to teach the individual. It's more about team strategy. Is that I get the experience of being able to go out and compete or go to lots of, a Globetrotters camp and roll with 800 different people. I'm getting a lot of data, as it were. And so I see as teaching a white belt as I'm trying to teach them to play football. Like they come in, they don't know how to play football. And then blue belts as they're on first team. And so from there, at that point on, if I say change the strategy, they change the strategy. Like if I say we're playing 4-3-3, play 4-3-3, because obviously skills are always going to get tighter over time, but it's complete shift in how it's not the individual. It's like, cool, welcome to first team kind of thing. And so same with them teaching with white belts. It's like, right, my job is to try and get you to understand the game of football, and whatever tool I need to do that. I'm not going to be a purist and say it's the mental gymnastics sometimes of people who are quite purist in various ways of, no, we have to be able to teach this drill ecological only. Even if it does not fit in the slightest and you've got to go through absolute hoops to get there. No, your job is to make someone conceptually enjoy the sport. Well, my personal opinion is choose the tool that gets you there. And if it allows them to understand the sport better, then do that. You don't have to be a purist on it. Like use mixed methodologies.
Got it. Now, how would this look if I were like a student in your gym? Say I'm a white belt, I wander in, and you look at me and I don't know anything about jiu-jitsu, but you've got these two dials. On one hand, you can regulate complexity with me. On the other hand, you can regulate intensity. What would you do to coach me as someone just coming in? You want to make sure I'm focused on skill development, not just going totally nuts when I'm fighting people. How would you go about doing that?
So we've actually just done a beginner course. It was a 6-week course, and it was across all our gyms, across all classes, and it was a 6-week curriculum, and I made every student do it. Doesn't matter what belt they were. It was almost like me resetting the narrative as it was. And so we had these people come in, and we've had, I've had people since joined as well that kind of missed the message and came to the beginner course late. But the first part I kind of approached with it was internal focus work instead of external focus. As in, they first come in, I explained to them, right, welcome to the football team. We're glad you're here. You're going to make us better, which is a very odd message to kind of be given on day one. And then from there on, the first lesson was on balance, like, the shadow, weight and shadow kind of understanding. And the person on the floor using their legs, right, even mentioned the idea of guard. How do I unbalance this person? And then we introduced the idea of having a strong back, like making sure your posture is good, making sure not just like posturing up like it's like you're coming out of closed guard, but actually, if you're in any strength-based sport or any sport in general, power is normally generated from your back and having good back posture. Like if you imagine, when we're in the gym and we're trying to use strength in any way, deadlift, squat, rows or benches, doesn't matter which way you're kind of pushing the weight around, your back always has to be strong. And so almost taking technique completely out of the game at this point and going, right, actually, I just need you to fix your body. That's it. And then I use this way of kind of explaining, like, check your mirrors is, when you're first learning to drive a car, all the things you're kind of focusing on are very internal to the car, kind of ignoring the road. As in, I need to make sure that I'm checking my mirrors, checking over my shoulder. I make sure if you're driving in Europe, making sure that I'm correct of how I use a clutch in the gears, making sure I'm indicating at the right time, and various other things that kind of, will help with the road, very small things, but you have to get into the habit of doing them if you want to be successful in driving. And that's how I will approach kind of teaching anyone who comes in the gym is, right, let's fix your back, let's fix your balance, let's fix your forward pressure and your momentum. Completely ignore technique. We're not going to even look at submissions. I just want you to be able to maintain this. And they're going to try and throw curveballs at you, and you just need to maintain that. And then even from day one, I can then get people to do those drills, as in I can get two beginners together and go, right, you're going to maintain your balance using shadow and weight understanding. You're just going to make them fall over their shadow. using your legs. And all of a sudden I've got one person learning sweeps and one person learning how to not get swept. I then have, introduce the mechanic of, right, I want you to keep your back strong. Keep your shoulder blades down, keep your back strong. I want you to check your mirrors and get used to the habit of checking your mirrors every 6 seconds. And that means checking your back and checking your balance. Other person, introduce trying to break their posture a little bit. Try and bend up their spine a little bit. And then once you start doing that, bend their spine a little bit and try and then push them over their shadow. And now I've got someone who can now attack from guard with posture breaks and sweeps. And the other person who's trying to resist it. And that's day one. Not looking at close guard or half guard or butterfly or any of those things. Not looking at side control or posture. Just that. Let's just work on that internal kind of focus work first. And once you've mastered that, then we can look at everything else. And when you've got people there who are more internal focused and understanding that I need to maintain this inside me and they're going to try and mess with it, they're not trying to fight back, and it kind of gets rid of those kind of flailing moments when it comes to sparring, because they understand that actually they're trying to mess with me. I just need to maintain this. If I can maintain this and keep my balance and my posture and I'm not going to get submitted, I'm benefiting today.
Yeah, I am also a big believer in a conceptual approach to jiu-jitsu. I have come to the conclusion that if I wanted to take a day one white belt and train them now, my thinking would be much different from even a few years ago. I know many coaches would start by introducing all of the positions like guard and side control and mount. And I don't think I would do that now. I would say, focus on your breathing, focus on not being too tense, and focus on keeping your alignment. And then when you get good at that, start thinking about how to attack the other person's alignment. And that basically is what you're talking about there. We're making sure that your body is in a mechanically strong athletic position. And from there, then starting to think about how can I chip away at my opponent's alignment. You do that, and the game of doing techniques becomes way easier. If you try to attack someone with an arm bar from a dead stop, it's going to be a challenge. But if you are constantly in good body position and constantly trying to take your opponent out of good body position, the techniques, the opportunities to do those just materialize, and it becomes a lot easier then to actually execute on those techniques. But the thing I find interesting about what you're talking about is, again, a lot of ecological coaches would probably say that what you're describing is basically using constraint-based games to create a training environment. So they might even argue that what you're doing is very similar to what they're doing. And I think that's kind of an interesting realization as to what a lot of coaches are doing. They might have different ways to describe it, but the goal of moving more towards this play state that's focused on good body mechanics, with techniques being secondary, that seems to be a very common thing that's cropping up all over the place.
Yeah, and I have seen, especially being around Preet and, he did his ecological camp, but I've seen some of the people that kind of left that camp and then started to try and implement it themselves. It's the mental gymnastics that was needed to kind of be purist on that. And to the point where it almost didn't resemble anything that would actually make sense in grappling. You went too far down a constraint-led way. It's I'm trying to, instead of being almost I'm trying to teach jiu-jitsu, but trying to do it in a subversive way of teaching, you teach yourself in a competitive environment. I just need you to understand the concept. Here's this concept. I want you to play with it. And if it makes sense, do it. And if you can fix the problems by using the concept, fantastic. Instead of the concept coming second, as it was. Almost not give them that much information, let them figure it out for themselves. Is I'm saying, no, I need you to understand this. I need you to feel this whole idea of weights and shadows. And you're going to try and push them over their weight and shadow. And I'm going, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I can feel that actually. That makes sense. And that's the thing as well, because it's puzzle based, as in I'm making a puzzle. I want a puzzle that can be repeated. As in, if I break you with a puzzle, if I push you over your shadow, I'll do it again. I need to be able to repeat my puzzles with a lesser intensity till you figure it out. Then I can increase the intensity again before I change the mechanic.
Yeah. It's interesting. It reminds me, again, going back to the world of development, of a common saying that you hear in software development is people before process. And this is part of what they call the Agile Manifesto. But the idea is that when you are trying to solve a complicated problem, one of the ways that you're going to do that is to start putting in place processes to get the job done, right? Ultimately, you want to have a system to do things that you can repeat on and get reliable results. But it's possible to get so attached to your own system that you wind up putting the process before the person. And like you said, it can get to the point where you become less concerned with actually getting results from people and more concerned with just actually making sure that the boxes were checked the way that they're supposed to be, quote unquote. And that's kind of how you get into the beginning of very bureaucratic problems where results aren't really being obtained anymore, but it's more just about making sure the machine is running the way it's always run because that's the way it's always run. And I do see your point that it's important to always prioritize, are people getting results? And I would say that if you're using a system that isn't getting results or that is causing issues for your students, regardless of what you call it, it's probably an idea to rethink whether it can be tuned somehow.
Exactly. Like, it's our job as a coach to try and get someone where they want to be when they cannot get there themselves. That's probably the best, most appropriate description of a coach in my eyes. Is my job is to help you understand jiu-jitsu, and how we get there is through my communication, not me being purist in any sort of way, but as in, I need you to understand how I see jiu-jitsu in the conceptual way I see it. What is the best way that's going to get me there? It's always communication. That's kind of like, it was the one thing that was beaten into me relentlessly in my previous life, was anything that ever went wrong where a firefighter died, it was always communication that went wrong. And it was never a massive just happenstance fuck up that kind of blew them away or whatever. It was always like small cuts of communication failure that then led to this bigger problem. And appreciating that, as in how I speak to beginners, how I hold myself in the gym, how I approach the team environmentally, and then finding the thing that kind of lines up to their frequency. Because the amount of, again, people who have, for some reason, I've been attached to this ecological movement as well. I have no idea why. But people approaching me saying, well, this person hasn't been receptive of me giving them ecological drills. Don't do it then. Like, your job as a coach to make her better and find the right tool that gets through to her or him. If it's not the right tool, don't use it. Find another way. Your job is communicator.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Well, how does this change when you're maybe further along in your journey? Let's say that you're a competitor, maybe you're more experienced. At that point, if your goal is to compete, at some point you will be encountering more heavy resistance, and you will be encountering people who are there to try to, inflict injury. And how does your coaching change in those environments? So we've talked about how we might regulate complexity and intensity for beginners, but how would that change if I were a black belt entering a major competition and you had to coach me to do that?
So I think having students who are more balanced, and like you said, it's about taking someone out of their balance and alignment. And when you've got an army almost of people who are very balanced and have great alignment, you have to be more inventive at breaking those things. And, again, in my job as strategist almost of like, right, what makes the most sense and what I feel from rolling with so many different people, what shuts them down. And so I then kind of incorporate this strategy into training. And that can adapt, obviously, with changing practices on what kind of becomes the meta. But one thing I kind of introduced was, so again, like you talk about intensity when it comes to sparring, is we had a student join recently, and he's young and he's fiery, and it didn't matter who he was going against, he'd just go 100%. And, kind of come my blue belts kind of reported like, this kid's going a bit hard, we need to calm him down. And it's quite easy at that point, especially from a historical kind of jiu-jitsu perspective, of beat the kid up. He's being a hard ass. Like, let's give him a bit of a kick in. But that's how you end up with abused children, is that they think that violence solves violence and being the bigger dog matters. And then you watch him go with his friend and then cause issues as well. And so I said, right, actually, no, we'll look at it this way, is that when you, kind of announce it across the gym, when you touch off, you're slapping your bum, you play. That's a natural state of things. We're a team, we make the team better. But I don't want that to isolate people who want to go have those harder rounds. So if you touch off and so you want to go, and the other person agrees, you go, and then gloves are off and you let the chips fall where they will. But there has to be an agreement to it. And so, especially when it comes to competing, etc., when you have those two people want to go harder at it, then there has to be that agreement. And so, we then go back to this kid and he comes to spar with me and I say, do you want to go? He went, actually, no, can we play instead? I was like, that's fine. Yeah, of course we can. And all of a sudden, I'm now getting reports like this kid's actually now really nice to roll with, because now he's been given a safe place to be able to actually train. He doesn't feel he has to be a maniac on the mats, just because very early in the game, we've now, in his career, instead of him thinking that he has to prove himself, actually, no, kid, don't worry, welcome to the team. If you want to have the hard rounds, you say, but it has to be an agreement. And if you don't feel safe, then you don't have to. We can play automatically, you know that, don't you? And just give him that choice. And so, but then you have, like I said, my other blue belts or purple belts who want to go with it. They have that option too, but it's a mutual agreement between two people, not an expected way of just you walk on the sparring and this is how it goes.
Yeah, yeah. Something that Jeff Shaw from Bellingham BJJ has said in the past, which I really love, really stuck with me, is that like all things in life, jiu-jitsu should always be consent-based. And look, if you want to go 100%, I think it's dumb. I think it's a bad way to learn. I think most good coaches will agree with me. But if you and someone else both mutually agree and you have a reason why you want to do that, as long as it's consent-based, that's your choice, right? That's completely different from having two people where one person just wants to play and the other person wants to really just like kick ass. And I mean, I don't know about you, Chris, but if I think back to most of the roles that I had that really pissed me off, that's where that happened. It's where I came in just wanting to play and goof around, and I had someone else who wanted to win gold medals in the gym, right? That is the worst case scenario. And again, that comes down to failure of communication and failure to get consent with the other person that you're talking about. Communicating with your training partner to make sure you're on the same page is so critical in jiu-jitsu. And it's also one of the most common mistakes that gets made in jiu-jitsu, where people just aren't on the same page about what they want to get out of a role.
Completely. And that's, again, maybe take on us all to myself, but that's my job as a coach. Like, my job is communicating, being controlled environment. Almost like technique is almost third or fourth on this list, is that my job is to make a safe place morally, not even legally, but morally make a safe place for people in this room and control that environment. And again, like if I've then set that example that this kid's being a bit of a nut and I end up kicking his ass to try and put him down, then he just thinks, well, if I want to be the big dog, I need to also be violent on people below me. And then the environment kind of carries on. So being able to kind of nip all those things in the bud very quickly and like, no, actually I'm going to set the narrative now of this is a football team and it's team growth over self-growth. Sometimes you have to have the harder rounds to make it so, you feel more like competition, but that is a consensual thing between two members on the same team. But that's because you want the harder rounds for your better training, not because you want to prove who's better, which again is one of those crux moments of like changing the gym environment.
I'm so glad you brought all of this up, because one of the dumbest things about jiu-jitsu culture that I just fail to understand is this whole idea of a mat enforcer. The idea that, well, if someone is going too hard, the solution is to go even harder on them. You talked about how this is how you perpetuate a cycle of abuse. And I think that's a great way to phrase this. What do you think is going to happen when you do this to someone? All you're doing is you're teaching them that when they get more experienced, their job is going to be to do the same to the next generation. You are, by definition, perpetuating the cycle of violence here. And I don't think that's the message that you want to send. I mean, first of all, because of just the massive amount of ethical and legal liability involved in trying to beat someone into submission so they behave the way you want. Even putting that aside, all you're doing is you're training the person that one day they will be the enforcer. Basically, you're not telling them how to be better. You're basically saying, you're not the bully right now, but if you keep at it, maybe one day you can be. And I just don't think that's the right message to send in jiu-jitsu.
Well, this whole thing is kind of coming from the risk assessment about environmental controls and hazard controls with regards to was, essentially a extreme sport in some way, has colored me quite a lot when it comes to even seeing stuff on YouTube or seeing stuff in seminars, etc. Like, it's almost like it's safeguarding younger students, because obviously there's so much information out there. And if someone shows a submission online, again, like take ownership of what the fuck you've just done. Is that you're showing a submission and it's just a quick Instagram clip of it, like something that people haven't seen before. Like you're giving essentially a weapon here. You're not giving context for how this weapon's supposed to cause the injury it's supposed to, like, with it being regards to chokes or joint submissions. And now you're giving it to people who have no control yet, just putting it out in the world. And they're going to go into their gym, having watched it, put this submission on, and potentially really hurt someone. Again, when they're in that environment, who's in control? Who's the competent person who should be in control of this? Like, it's the person at the top. And if I've got someone coming in after they've seen someone on YouTube, or they're trying to show a submission that they've known previously and show it to someone else, like, you better be able to back up exactly what you're doing right now. And you better back up how this causes injury, the injury it causes, even on the most basic level, and the controls you're going to now teach this person to put in place that they don't cause someone else a serious injury from this. And it could be a serious injury, it could be a smaller injury, but the amount of people in jiu-jitsu have got wrecked shoulders and wrecked necks because a submission was slammed on a little bit too hard.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what happened to me. My shoulder got ripped and I'm probably going to need surgery because there was a mismatch in expectations. And it is frustrating when you're just sitting around trying to roll and someone else has very little interest in control. They just want to throw body weight around and do damage. It's a very frustrating thing. You know, something I've said on the podcast many times is that whenever you encounter one of these things in jiu-jitsu, that just feels wrong. It feels like the culture is off. People often ask me, Steve, is this acceptable behavior in my gym? The answer I give is, would you tolerate this from any other business? If you went to a Starbucks and they treated you the way that you're being treated in the jiu-jitsu gym, would you accept that? And the answer is probably no. I mean, I can't imagine any other walk of life where if you don't follow expectations to the letter, the expected behavior would be that some experienced person is going to beat the bejesus out of you. The example, I mean, this is maybe dating myself, but there were video clips going around from like back in the 90s or something about Terry Tate, the Office linebacker. Have you ever seen those?
I think you might be a bit older than I am here.
Okay, I'll maybe put a link in the show notes, but basically the idea it was like some comedy sketches, and the concept is that there's this office, and in order to make sure that all employees are following the rules, they hired a professional linebacker to just come in and tackle and beat the shit out of anyone who misbehaves. So, if you don't fill up the coffee machine properly, you're going to get smoked. If you don't, fill up the paper tray after you use the printer, you're going to get your ass kicked. And it's just so absurd. But that's basically what we do to people in jiu-jitsu. Our answer is often, if they're not doing things the right way or the way that we want, we correct them by violence. And I just don't think that's the right approach for all of the reasons that you laid out here.
Well, I think it's one of the biggest issues, I think, regarding jiu-jitsu. And again, like I keep going back to the fire service here because it's all I knew and I'm not an intelligent person in that way, is that the way you kind of went up the ranks in the fire was based on how you did at incidents, how your incident management was. And that's kind of the exam you'd go through. And so, you go from firefighter to crew manager to watch manager, etc. And you climb up this depending how well you could manage a wider incident with spans of control, which then kind of created the problem where, you'd award people for their abilities when it came to incidents, but not their abilities at man management when it got to station level. And so it was purely by accident you came across good managers. Now, they might all be amazing when it got outside and it got a bit hairy, but inside they couldn't manage people at all. And it was only by accident you come across those people who could. And it's very similar to jiu-jitsu, is that the expectation is a gym is run by a black belt. Okay, what's their qualification? Oh, they can just kick everyone's ass. Cool. Is that it? So it's the same thing though. They're really good when it comes to being on the mats and smoking people. But when it comes to people management, they have no idea. And yet all these kind of issues that we're talking about when it comes to environment and culture and communication and risk and safety and all those things that would make people not enjoy jiu-jitsu, that's all down to communication and those things that you kind of expect from someone at the top. And so the idea that we then perpetuate this idea that, no, you have to be a black belt to teach jiu-jitsu. No, I'll accept a good blue belt who can understand concept, but can run a gym safely and with good communication. That matters more to me than anything else. And it was actually someone came to me recently on Instagram saying he's a purple belt, he wants to start his own gym. Like, what advice I gave him? I went, do not worry about technique. Like, the environment and the safety of the people in that gym are absolutely paramount. And if you can't do that, if you can't be a competent person in that way, don't open it. This has nothing to do with your skill level. This is everything to do with the culture you can create and your approach to safety.
Yeah. I wish people better understood how little skill level actually matters, like your grappling skill level, when it comes to being a successful coach. All of the other skill sets are way more important than how good you are at individually beating people up in jiu-jitsu. And it's weird to me in the sport that we prize that so heavily, because so many other sports have figured this out, right? That your individual performance as a coach is irrelevant, but yet in jiu-jitsu, it's still the thing that we often look for the most is, how good is my coach individually at jiu-jitsu, when maybe we should be better off focused on all of the other skill sets around coaching that are so important and that impact the team much more than the coach's individual ability.
Well, a lot of the stuff that we can say, I think, especially from a black belt's perspective, I realize the irony of a lot of what I'm saying is that we're not skilled in a lot of the things that people want from us. I mean, we might be by accident, but half the time, again, it's because we're the hard ass to beat people up. And like another example that I have is there's a Norwegian nutritionist, Judith Diab, who is very good at when it comes to relationship with food. And that how, especially the kind of advice we can give as black belts when it comes to competing or weight cutting and all those other things or PEDs, etc. We could be messing up people for life and their relationship with food. And like we look at things like megorexia and how people then will become obsessed with getting bigger and all those things and how their world gets colored this way. And we've got a lot of sway as gym owners and as black belts, and we're giving out this information and then making it so people can end up with permanently messed up relationships with food. Like, what qualifications have we got to be able to give this information? Yet people are kind of expect it from us because, we once cut weight and we once competed. Doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. And that doesn't even get into the fact that just because you had individual success at this, that doesn't mean that you're qualified, right? It's possible to just beast mode your way to success or to just get really lucky. But sometimes in jiu-jitsu, we do have, I guess, a bit of a survivorship bias where we look at someone and say, well, they won a world championship in jiu-jitsu, so they must be knowledgeable about things like nutrition and strength and conditioning, right? Because they succeeded at the highest levels, but these are totally different skill sets. And just because you were able to amble through it doesn't mean that you're an expert by any means. That's something we always must be careful of. And another reason why we must also be careful about being too praising of black belts. Just because someone got a black belt doesn't mean that they really represent the best of what jiu-jitsu has to offer. So we always must bear in mind that, especially because getting a black belt is so unregulated. Everyone has completely different standards about what that even means.
Well, even the like I said about world championship level, etc. Like, this person won a world championship. Like, even the fact, someone kind of, it was one of the questions I had recently is like, what is one of the main, people again want this romantic idea of what jiu-jitsu is like, what's the main criteria for like being able to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu? I just said money, because like, if you can't afford the gym subs to stick at it for a long period of time, you ain't going to get a black belt. And then, one of the criticisms I hear sometimes is, what has Chris won? Has he ever won at Worlds? It's like, well, let's put that into perspective. Is that I live in the UK, and taking into considering currency conversions, say I could live in a different part of Europe that had a worse currency conversion to the US. But me to fly to Vegas isn't going to be cheap. Me to then stay in Vegas long enough to get over my jet lag isn't going to be cheap. To afford a hotel in Vegas, to then pay the IBJJF membership fees, to make sure my uniform is up to code, to then actually pay for the competition itself. Like, we're looking at a few £1,000. Especially the currency's kind of going a bit whack. It could be even more. And when you're a person who's now got a family or a career, and you think, right, I'm going to go blow £3,000 or £4,000 on myself to go potentially, hopefully win this competition, but I could get knocked out in the first 5 minutes. Like, can I morally justify that as a family man? Probably not. Like, that's almost like a once in a lifetime thing. And then again, has any of Chris's students won at Worlds? Same issue. Is that, have they got the money to then be able to train all day, to actually afford their nutrition and be able to afford to go to the gym? Are they funded to then actually go do this as well? What are the chances of a small gym in Stafford having that kind of person rock through the gym on a daily basis? Probably very small. Chances of it happening in Times Square, Manhattan, probably a lot higher. But you're also in the States. Like, it makes it a lot easier to get to Vegas. You don't have to cross a giant pond. And so, when it comes to like, what's the criteria for like winning a good high level in jiu-jitsu competition? Be rich. And if that's the criteria then for being a gym owning black belt, is that, has he won world? Yeah, because you had decent parents that funded his trip for jiu-jitsu. Okay, he lived close by. It's none of that comes into coaching ability at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have a friend who is a well-respected jiu-jitsu athlete and coach. And he was telling me about some of the students he worked with. And he said, he's got 2 students that he thinks have tons of promise. One of those students went on to become very successful. The other one of those students, no one ever heard of them. And my friend said that, the thing is, he felt that the other student that no one had ever heard of was actually probably better. But due to life circumstances, one guy just had more opportunities, whereas the other guy had a lot of life circumstances that would prevent him from being able to really do jiu-jitsu full time. And that made all the difference. So I know we love to talk about meritocracy and how the best get results and the cream rises to the top, but the real world is not as much of a meritocracy as you think. I mean, you could take the best jiu-jitsu athlete in the world, but if they grew up in Indonesia, just because of the geographics, like you said, it would be very hard for them to get to these major tournaments, to pay for these major tournaments. Even if they're the best athlete on paper, they just simply will not have the same access and the same opportunities as other people. And that does matter. So it's another reason why, as coaches and as athletes, we have to be very careful when we look to the survivors and we look to the champions to take lessons from them, because that doesn't necessarily mean they were the best. It just meant they're the ones that survived. And there could be a lot of other reasons why other people were eliminated from the process early. This is actually another great example of why overly violent, aggressive jiu-jitsu is a bad culture to have, because if you have a culture where your students are constantly being waylaid by injuries and other things, you're denying them the opportunity to grow to that skill level. And then you really do create a survivorship bias where the few lucky people who survived made it out to the other end. You're going to be much better off if you can keep everyone on the mats and let everyone get those opportunities rather than having your people sidelined because of avoidable injuries.
I mean, it's, we're not being honest enough about jiu-jitsu a lot of the time. Like, so this kind of idea of meritocracy and the best fighter will always rise to the top and become the black belt. Like, that's so far from the truth. Again, like, going back to Preet, is that, amount of times I've seen on Reddit, like, what has Preet won, what has the students won? To my knowledge, the average wage monthly in Tallinn is $1,000 average wage. So you think for then any of those students to go to Worlds, that could be potentially 4 months' wages to could do a competition. Like, cool. Like, chance of that happening, very, very small. You could have those absolutely great students come through the door. And if you're not then giving them that, if they're kind of being fed into this world that, has on this gym won Worlds? Like, what's the chance of me being able to go all the way to the top and stuff like that? It's like, let's be honest here. Like, from where we're at and how this is shaped, probably not very likely. Sorry.
Yeah.
But so my job here is to make you enjoy this sport and try and give you as much skill as we can.
As much as I'm loath to admit it, the winning meta has always been and probably always will be who's got the most money. And I think you bring up a great point.
Yeah, it's so sad. And it's been the history of our sport since the beginning.
But it's really been the history of life, right? That kind of is the way that it is. And our ability as jiu-jitsu coaches to change that is quite limited. But as you said, the one thing that we can control is we can make sure that our students have the best, most life-changing, positive experience in jiu-jitsu. That's something that we can control. We can create a great room. We can reduce the risk of injury. We can create a positive skill development environment. We can build a team where people make long-term friendships. We can help people develop confidence and get in shape, learn self-defense. We can do all of those things. So I always respect coaches who emphasize that rather than podium chasing, which again, isn't as much of a meritocracy as maybe we've been led to believe.
No. And again, it kind of all circles back around to the idea of then the environment you create in the gym is that if you believe it to be a meritocracy and, you got to fight your way to the top, fight your way to get your belts, beat someone who has that belt to be able to get above them. And these things are, I say I'm guilty of just because I was ignorant at the time, but I'll happily, admit I was wrong. But it's that idea of, if you want to get a black belt, like it's beat your way past everyone else and climb better and survive, instead of it being a way of actually, we're all here to understand the sport better. If we all stay healthy, we can all make it to the top. So how about we all help each other rise there through correct environment and ample, clear communication? But it doesn't sound as cool when you have in the post tap out era of just bleed. No, sorry, just communicate. Maybe that would be my new t-shirt.
Well, Chris, on the topic of your popularity within our household, I've already made fun of you and abused you here. But as you know, my daughter is in the other room and she's getting very impatient about me coming out to play the new Legend of Zelda with her. And you don't want her mad at you. So we should probably wrap this up.
I don't want to miss out on video games.
Exactly.
I'm pro video game. You didn't have to say anything. Like I said, my daughter wants to play computer games. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, my bad. I should have shut up like 1 hour and 19 minutes ago. Like, you go play.
Well, let's tie this one up then. Any closing thoughts, Chris, that you wanted to share, or did we cover everything?
No, I think that's everything. But thank you for allowing me to come back on. And you can see there's a bee under my bonnet right now when it comes to instructor negligence. Not just like the obvious stuff like, sexual malpractice and stuff like that, just how we even talk to people and how we even run jiu-jitsu gyms and our ethics and morals when it comes to just making sure the gym is safe. It's something that's so, people say, oh, did you have a lot of accidents? No, we didn't really. But look at it from this angle, like, it could only be a matter of time. And that scares the life out of me. So I hopefully, if someone's listening to this and go, oh shit, maybe we can, maybe this is interesting. Maybe we should go down this rabbit hole a little bit.
Well, I am glad that people like yourself are so vocal about these issues, Chris. It really does mean a lot, not just to myself, but to a lot of people that I respect as well. So I'll tie this up. Let's point people in your direction. If people want to learn from you, follow you, talk to you, check out your work, how do they do that, sir?
So I'm available on Instagram, and I usually reply, maybe. And that's Chris Villain Pains or Chris Villain BJJ. I'm pretty easy to find. I have my own online learning platform. I got on that bandwagon a year ago. It's called In Theory BJJ, where I pretty much post all my stuff now, and I do make a lot of monthly content and people subscribe. And I also do like monthly coaching videos and where people like do one-to-ones with me, etc. over the internet. So I can be found on those things, but I've also got YouTube, Chris Pains BJJ. I've got 4 videos on Fanatics now, which I've done pretty all right. So you'll find me pretty easily on the internet. I'm pretty out there. So just type Chris Pains BJJ.
Well, I will make it even easier. I will put those links in the show notes. So if people want to check out your material or follow you or reach out to you, just open up your podcast player, go to the show notes, and there's links there for you. I'll also put a link to our stuff. Everything we make lives at bjjmentalmodels.com for completely free. You can get every episode of the podcast that we've ever done on the public feed, over 300. You can get our newsletter, which I definitely recommend. We've got a whole database of jiu-jitsu mental models and concepts on our website that hopefully will be a good reference and companion for all of the stuff that we talk about here. That's all the free stuff. If you want to kick it up to the next level with us, go to BJJ Mental Models Premium. You can also get that at bjjmentalmodels.com. That's our paid service. It is totally unlike any of the other paid services that you'll find out there. Our focus is on a lot of the kind of stuff we talked about here today, the big game-changing concepts. If you're looking for another video library of techniques, that's really not our thing. There's a lot of other people who already do that. But if you want to explore things like mental models for jiu-jitsu, how to optimize your thinking and make better decisions fast, mindset, strategy, tactics, we've got the biggest library of jiu-jitsu audio courses there, and it's all just one monthly subscription. You don't have to buy each thing individually, so in terms of value, that's really hard to beat. You also get access to our community, which I strongly recommend. There was actually a thread on Reddit recently where someone asked about BJJ Mental Models Premium and whether it was worth it, and a lot of people chimed in and really endorsed the product. And I just want to say for all the people who did that, really meant a lot to me, so thank you for that. I do recommend everyone give it a go. Hopefully you'll get as much value out of it as the existing subscribers do. But if you want to learn more about that and get a 7-day free trial, go to bjjmentalmodels.com. And again, I will put a link to that in the show notes. But Chris, thanks so much, man. I'm going to go play some Zelda. You have yourself a great night. And thanks as always for coming by.
No, thank you so much for having me on again. I was chuffed when you dropped me a message. So thank you, sir. You're
always welcome here, buddy. Thanks a lot, man. And to the listeners, sincere thanks to you as well. Really appreciate everyone hanging out with us here each week. And we'll talk to you soon.